Bitch, I was in here having a fucking existential crisis. Mind you, my school is having a James Baldwin symposium, and Eddie Glaude, he wrote the whole book, which I honestly should have went to go get signed. I look-key still could. This is his book, and basically it's like James Baldwin's America and its urgent lessons for our own. And I'm in a class called James Baldwin's Civil Rights, and my professor asked us to send in some questions for the talk. I couldn't think of anything because I'm like, oh, we have to do it off the top of our heads. So off the top of my head, I'm always trying to include environmental justice in whatever I do because I think that sometimes it's siloed into just NVS studies when it actually has connections to other things. So I'm like, fuck it, I've never tried to do this with a Black Studies class like this, so let me try. So I asked the question off the top of my head, and the question is, climate change is obviously a pressing social justice issue of our time. One example being Hurricane Milton, where incarcerated people in North Carolina were forced to shelter in place during the storm instead of being allowed to evacuate. How do you think we can interpret solutions or understandings to environmental and climate justice through Baldwin's work? And so that was asked. I was so surprised. I was like, wouldn't it be funny if my question was asked? But I didn't think it would be asked because I'm like, it has like no, unless you were like a scholar of environmental justice or like in those circles where like you're considering that at all, which I don't know Mr. Glaude's academic history, so I don't know. I didn't really expect him to have an answer to it, so that's why I didn't even expect it to get asked. But alas, because God loves me, it was asked, and I wasn't there because, like I said, I was here having an existential crisis. And my friends, like, I got like 20 people sending me messages about it. 3. And my friend recorded it and sent me a video of him answering it, which is like, she's goated for that. Shout out her. She's goated for recording. And he's just like, well, I don't really know. I have to think about that. I've never thought about it in that way. And whatever. And then the moderator was like, well, they were like, is Kayla here? Kayla was not in the building. And then they were like, well, if Kayla is here, she can come and talk to him afterwards. So I was like, okay, let me go. So I lived like 2 seconds to hop in a skip away from where the talk was being held, so I put my shoes on and I ran over there. And I waited online and I talked to him, and it was kind of like the similar answer. He was very like clearly desiring to want to give an answer, but he just didn't know, and that's okay. And I think, and what I said was that I think that his discussions of environmental justice or like alluding to it is very subtle, and I don't even think I don't think Baldwin is an environmental justice author. I'm not trying to say that, but I think environmental justice and its themes are woven into everything. We don't really realize it. And so I said it was subtle because we watched I Heard It Through the Grapevine, which is a film about how Baldwin basically travels through the South and hits these major major places that were like important places during the civil rights movement and talks to different civil rights leaders from those areas. So he goes to, obviously, like, he goes to Atlanta, Georgia, that's where he started. Then they go to Birmingham, then they go to Selma, then they go to New Orleans, Louisiana, and then they come back up north to Newark. I wish I could buy the movie because I think I Heard It Through the Grapevine itself, if it were to be watched through an environmental justice lens, like there are so many different things that can be pulled from it that connect to environmental justice, and I'll break that down because in the moment I couldn't really articulate it, but what I said, one thing I said was that, firstly, when Baldwin was, driving in the car, there's a scene where he's driving in the car in Birmingham, and they're in the South, obviously, so there's trees, like, coloring the highways, and there's just throughout the film, there's long stretches of just, like, them driving through the landscape. And Baldwin says that let me look, because I wrote it down. He said, you're aware of the trees, you're aware of how many of your brothers hung from those trees in that landscape, under that sky, you're there to confront something. And I think that really, and I said this during the panel, but I think that really speaks to the trauma Black people have associated with the land because of the history of slavery, because of the history of racism, because he was referring to lynchings in that same, and just how looking at the landscape and reminds him of Black men being lynched and hung from those trees. And then you fast forward in the film, and Baldwin and his brother and other people who's traveling with meet with this co-op farmer in, where the fuck were they? They were in Philadelphia, Mississippi, which is like, Philadelphia, Mississippi is random. No shade to Philadelphia, Mississippi. I just didn't know there was Philadelphia and Mississippi. The more you know. His name was Charles Sherrod, and he was a co-op farmer.
and he had bought 40 acres of land to grow food on, but to also like have as a community space. So he was building a daycare center on that land. He was building an educational area on that land, maybe like something connecting to a school or just like community education. He also said that he goes to that land to meditate and pray when he's kind of overwhelmed with his work and like, I guess, the greater movement. And then like the land is the place where he restores his like hope again. And I think, oh my God, I was in my seat like dancing because I'm like, oh my God, like this is literally, I get so excited. This is literally environmental justice and like the understanding of like, I don't know. I hate when people say that, like when people who are into like, I think it's so interesting, or like the understanding of, or like the idea, and I'm saying that over and over again because it's in my brain and I'm trying to figure out how to say it. But then he also talks about how the land has been foreclosed on so many times, and how he feels that the land is not something to be owned, it's rather something to be stewarded and felt or whatever. And I think that the threat of foreclosure connects to, I don't know, just like land historically being taken from Black people, but also just like the threat of like development and like modernity on land that is seen as unproductive. Because that land had like, it was just acres of free space. And then in my own, even in Philadelphia, connecting to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, currently there's this farm called the Reentry Farm, and there's so many different urban farms in Philadelphia that are really cool. And Reentry Farm has been threatened with the land being taken by the state because it's considered vacant land, but it's not vacant. They're on that land and they're growing things and they're having community workshops, and their land wants to be taken so that it can be developed and turned into apartments and the area can be gentrified, etc., etc. And I think putting a period on that, because, you know, one comment was that, you know, Baldwin is really focused on the urban area, but I think the urban area is also home to so many environmental injustices that, you know, we might not even realize. He spends so much time talking about Harlem and the projects in Harlem. One thing I also want to add in this part is that Harlem especially is like the root for so much environmental justice organizing in New York. We Act, which is like one of the like premier, I don't know if premier is the right word, but like the EJ organizations in the nation, which is based in New York City. West Harlem Environmental Action, because I recently went to a webinar hosted by We Act on dirty hydrogen and carbon sequestration, which is kind of like the new green energy that is kind of being greenwashed. And by that, I mean corporations and, I don't know, the government. It's really seeing this new kind of energy that seems like it's green and good for the environment, but has like devastating effects on Black and brown and low income communities in the Gulf, in New York, and in New Jersey, and in Chester, Pennsylvania specifically. So I think I would love to go back and read Baldwin's discussion of Harlem and descriptions of Harlem and characters or whatever with the lens of like connecting the current day environmental justice movement and its power in Harlem. Additionally, there's so many environmental justice organization groups based in Harlem, and I know that, and I bring it up because like I'm from New York and I'm trying to go back and find a way to be active in groups, and I want to be active in my own community. Like I'm from Brooklyn, I'm not from Harlem, but all roads lead to either Harlem, the Bronx, and then South Brooklyn, but Harlem specifically. So I forgot to say that when I was doing this before. And even I heard it the Grapevine, they go to Newark, New Jersey, and they go to projects in Newark, New Jersey, and they discuss how these projects are just basically prisons, essentially. And I think there was this lady who was talking about her apartment conditions and how she can't even get her door fixed by the management. And I think that connects to NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority. And I don't know, I'm just making all these connections in my head because a couple weeks ago there was this Swarthmore alum that came to visit, and he's a community organizer against NYCHA because they have New York City Housing Authority, because they have horrendous housing conditions, especially for their residents in the Bronx and Brownsville, which are predominantly, the Bronx is predominantly Latinx and Black and low income, and Brownsville is predominantly Black and low income. And those are like some of the worst NYCHA housing projects, period, or home to some of the worst. And they have like cases of mold that NYCHA doesn't come to fix at all. And I think like the way that translates to the city, like we have the South where like trees are these, I don't know, not threatening, but like trees are these places of violence, and the landscape are places of violence for Black people in the South because this is where lynching occurred. But then you come to the North and you have these projects, these urban developments that are also places of violence to Black people, and that's also connected to that environment and what is deemed, like, what environments are deemed sacrificial in the North, and, you know, whatever. So I think there's a lot of subtle connections to environmental justice throughout Baldwin's work that, you know, of course, if you are not an environmental justice scholar, it might not think right away. I forgot my ice cream is out. But I think it's really subtle, and I think it's also not even that really subtle. I think I just have an eye for it because I'm doing it. But I think also again, I brought up the question, and the only reason I brought it up is because I think I've heard so many people this week talk about, how is it 80 degrees in November? How is it 80 degrees in October? And I think people are finally realizing, or not finally, but just like talking, because this is the most I've ever heard people talk about climate change in my life in the last couple of days. So the reason I felt comfortable asking it, because I'm like, okay, I feel like now we all have an example of how climate change is like happening, whatever. Of course, climate change is my focus, but the key thing about environmental justice communities is that they have a double burden. They are, one, targets of environmental pollutions which exacerbate climate change, but they are also more vulnerable to climate change. And I think that's why I center environmental justice communities so much when I talk about these things. I just think that 2024, people should know what environmental justice communities are. People should know what environmental justice are, especially if we're all going to be thinking about climate change. We should be thinking about climate change while centering environmental justice issues. And I think historically, through writing, like Bell Hooks has a whole thing called Touching Earth, and like there's themes of environmental justice there. I just think we should be a little bit more EJ literate when it comes to connecting things, especially as like academic scholars. No shade to anyone actually, but I don't know. But he seemed really interested in like trying to answer the question. But I think, like I said, I think it's really subtle, and I'm not surprised. Like, I was surprised they even asked that. Shout out them. But yeah, that's my 2 cents. I can't believe I did that in 11 minutes. But that's all I think. And I didn't say that because, like, one, who cares? Two, that's a lot to say. But that's just off the top of my head of, like, the EJ connections. Again, I heard it through the grapevine. It's just, like, it's a vlog. It's a vlog, but it's, like, a vlog through landscapes, a vlog through places. And I think a lot of sociology and anthropology lenses are focused on, like, race and place, and, like, and Baldwin is focused on race and place and, like, Blackness in the South, Blackness in the North. So I think since there's such a focus on place, we should also, the next thing should be, like, okay, place and environmental issues, place and environmental injustice or justice. So that's my 2 cents. I was honored to have asked a thought-provoking question. That's all, like, honestly, that made my life, because I'm always like, damn, I don't ask good questions. Like, I don't think about questions, like, but sometimes, and this is just word to anyone, it's easier than you think. I thought I had to have, like, read all these fucking books and be able to quote fucking Fanon and Du Bois and all this shit. No, bitch, just think about something you're interested in. Are you thinking about this too? No? Well, that's the question. Anyways, I'm really loud. I'm gonna go. I'm really excited. This made me I was having a fucking existential crisis in my room. I was really in my room going crazy. My phone is blowing up. I happen to see it. I'm like, what did I do? And I slayed. Anyways, I'm gonna go.